one.
Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Daily Objective. We're going to be talking about the experience of adopting a new philosophy, discovering, adopting, kind of integrating it into your world. And it requires a certain type of person to kind of describe this process, someone who's kind of introspecting and documenting it all as it's happening. Go ahead, leave a like and start to super chat. Now, we are going deep. I'm here with a guy who, frankly, is a good looking guy. I think he kind of looks like me. It's my long lost twin brother, Seth Levine. Welcome to the show.
Hey, great to be here. And it's great to talk about something other than finance for a change.
What, how we look? Yeah, that's my favorite thing to talk. Yeah. No, it is nice. If you got something to say other than your main topic, then why not? So you once messaged me after you heard me talking. I think you heard me on this show talking about religion and a heavy religious indoctrination and this very, very literal version of God and the Bible that I was taught growing up. And I think it made you then tell me something like that. For you, discovering Ayn Rand's philosophy, the main change was in the branches of ethics and epistemology, whereas it sounds like for me, the big challenge was in metaphysics. Do you remember saying that to me? And what did you mean?
Yeah, absolutely. So that's, deep may be an understatement today, but it's pretty interesting. I reflect a lot, I guess, on how I came to the philosophy, why I got so interested in philosophy, and I guess the void, that philosophy filled, or the need that it filled. And it's interesting because, I've talked about this a lot kind of, with friends. And, one thing I've noticed is people come to philosophy for different reasons. And that makes sense, I guess, if you think about how Rand talks about philosophy. But for me, the real void that it filled was, the first scratch was sort of ethical, and then like the real, that of course, relied on epistemological kind of premises, because I didn't really suffer from a metaphysical deficiency, for lack of a better word, and I could get into that deeper, where, what objectivism gave to me was my main kind of utility of it was the ethics. I grew up, obviously just sort of a middle of the road sort of ethicist, I'll say. I was an altruist, but like a centrist, like I thought we needed to have, you couldn't take altruism to the to its logical conclusions and everyone just kill themselves. That didn't make any sense, but I didn't have a real set of principles to live by. And once I sort of discovered Rand and gave me the ethics of virtual selfishness, and really the epistemology around that, whereas it gave me the confidence of reason, right? I was able to sort of, once I took reason seriously, I gained a lot of self-confidence in myself, and the whole ethical framework that objectivism provided, it gave purpose to my life and my actions that was just completely void before. When I think about my life before, and I really look back on it, and I'm a little sad about it, because I was a bit nihilistic, I think. The way how I behaved sort of in my my teenage life, into my throughout college, and definitely into my 20s, although less so, because I did find purpose through work. But I felt almost rudderless, and that made me a little bit self-destructive. And I realize that now is because that's sort of, I didn't have the ethical guidance that came from the rational self-interest framework that Rand provided. So it's a bit about my story. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, what did you mean when you told me that it sounds like my big change was in metaphysics? Because that stuck with me. That changed my life. I'm still thinking in those terms to this day.
That's pretty interesting. Yeah. So, for me, I grew up in a religious, I would say religious household, like a conservative Judaism household. Which is basically just kind of like, to me, it's the equivalent of being like a centrist in politics.
Yeah,
Not
let me just say, for people who don't know, conservative sounds very strict, but the word conservative Judaism was devised to differentiate from the even more liberal secular, basically, version of Judaism that's reform. So conservative Judaism compared to Orthodox is still pretty
very
new
lenient.
age, lenient, new age, and basically not even real Judaism if you ask Orthodox people.
100%. Yeah.
Back to
100%. Yeah. So I kind of grew up in that framework, and like the whole like metaphysics of God thing never resonated with me. You know, I have very distinct memories of being in services over like the high holidays, and you know, which is like, you know, the big thing, you're there, you know, would go there, you know, one of the maybe 5 days a year that I was there in a suit and a tie. And, you know, I would take it. I was a good, studious person. I would go, I would show up, I would try and like use it for something. I would stay there, I would be quiet. And, you know, I would sort of do the, I forget the philosopher, but the, who's the Pascal's wager thing, where, for those who are not familiar, right, it's the, you know, be religious because in the event that you die and there is a God in an afterlife, well, at least like, you know, you're prepared. If you grow up, you know, if you act like there is no God and you show up and there is a God, well, guess what? You know, you're screwed. So, but it never really resonated. Like I never sort of bought, I never really bought into sort of the whole God thing. I would call myself agnostic. And there were a couple things that really, there were a couple of concretes that I couldn't really get my head around into believing that there was a God. And the first one, which really like stuck with me is, I've never told this story before, so it's kind of interesting. Ooh, yeah. Pop the popcorn is, I would think like, okay, let's say there's an afterlife. People, you know, if you're good, you go there, right? If you're not good, then, you know, you don't. All right, well, okay, so that's for people. But what about dogs? Does your dog go to the afterlife? Now, some people will be like, oh, of course your dog goes to the afterlife. You know, you're cute and cuddly, you see them all. And then like, I was like, all right, well, your pets come to the afterlife with us. Well, what about like bugs? Do bugs come? And it was like, it sounds silly, but like, it was just, you know, if you go like the whole Aristotelian sort of thinking, like it was a contradiction. There's a huge contradiction there in terms of like the afterlife. And then, so that was like probably one of the biggest things. And then, you know, as I was sitting sort of in religious services and reading from the Torah, which is the big holy book, right? You go and you sit and you listen, and it's very quiet and very serious. You know, I had nothing else to do. Like I would read the English transliteration of it, the English translation of it. And I was reading this stuff and I was like, this is kind of silly. Like we're sitting here, this is like the most important days of the year. You know, people are in these very, you know, monotone chants, taking things very seriously. And then I would read it and it would be like, go find 3 goats, tie them up to a tree. Then on the 3rd night, you know, if it's not raining, and then if it's not too cold and if it's not too hot, go and like feed the goat this from this bush. I'm like, this, like, we're talking about like goats here. Like, this is like, how does anyone know that we're talking about this? Like what is going on? So I never, that was sort of another clue where it was just like, I don't know. I just can't take the metaphysics of religion too seriously. And I kind of had just a little bit more of a Pascal's wager on it. But because I sort of, so I had a little bit more of a reality for a reality centered metaphysics, but what religion destroyed in me, it just absolutely destroyed me growing up. And I didn't realize it till later, was there's a saying, you know, Yiddish saying, be a mensch, right? And it's said so innocuously, and it's meant with all the best intentions. But basically, be a mensch means like be a good person. Well, how do you be a good person in an altruistic, you know, framework? Is, you know, you're always kind of doing for others and always kind of sacrificing. So, you know, I was a pretty good student. So I took that seriously. And I took it seriously, and like it was tough, in other words, because, you know, you can't live an altruistic life and live a material life at the same time. So that sort of was really, that kind of had a, replacing that sort of contradiction really helped, was really for me what did it. So be curious kind of why that metaphysical kind of comment kind of stuck with you.
Well, the more you learn about objectivism in relation to the history of philosophy, the more you see that even when philosophers were rejecting religion, they said at a certain point, people started to say, yeah, religion, fundamentalist religion is kind of silly. And you even had some atheist philosophers. But until Ayn Rand, it's like they're still looking for a godly explanation. So when it comes to epistemology, they're like, if you don't know everything at once from all possible angles in every respect, then you're basically always going to be skeptical. You're never really going to know for sure. So there's no such thing as certainty, and you end up there with skepticism beyond repair, when really then religion then becomes the only thing you can turn to have any type of certainty and direction. So when it comes to metaphysics, I realized we tend to still kind of look for a godlike metaphysics where like poof, the world exists, like poof, the universe came into being. It's hard to explain exactly, but I think Platonism is sort of the theme of it all. Like it's been said that all of philosophy is footnotes on Plato. Not sure if they meant this in particular, or if they just meant he was like the first real one and then everyone was reacting. But in any case, Platonism, where like there's a perfect form of something everywhere, like somewhere, and like everything we're doing is sort of relates to that. But I've come to really appreciate the objectivist metaphysics and its importance, or I'm beginning to appreciate it. We live in a world of entities. The nature of a particular entity has nothing to do with the idea of that entity somewhere else. Like there's no perfect version of this cup somewhere that this is trying to be. It's just we live in a world of entities. We live in a world of finite things. I guess I'm going to need more time to kind of learn how to articulate all this, but just sort of like learning to reject the religious metaphysics has kind of it's become increasingly important. And I do see Plato as kind of like the more I learn about Plato, kind of like the more I see Plato as like the ultimate sort of cause of this. But it leaves the question, did Plato create this problem, or was he just kind of giving voice to something that savages and children sort of default, they sort of default to, like they just kind of not automatically, but very quickly sort of form these conclusions that there's this sort of mystical sort of base to everything.
Interesting. Is it the what's the word for it? I mean, there is like, this has been debated by philosophers, is it the origin story of kind of the world that kind of gets you, or is it the design of the world, right? I think there's maybe someone in the chat could kind of help me out here. Like there's, I think, like three arguments or main arguments for principled arguments for kind of the existence of a God, kind of like the design, origin, or something else. Was that sort of what you're trying to wrap your head around? Or is it because like the metaphysics, like what out of metaphysics did you let's go back to the title. What void did Rand filled in your metaphysics? Because I'm assuming there was something unsatisfactory with your metaphysics. Well,
I think like you, the ethics and the sort of limitation of her epistemology, like that there's no room for faith and for bullshit. I think that really struck me like it strikes so many people and alter, and the ethics, there is a sense in which the ethics are at the center, where everything kind of points to ethics, because that's what matters, that's where the rubber
meets the road, so to speak.
That's right, so to speak. But the more I've sort of struggled to kind of plant my feet in the ground and to kind of introspect and to kind of better myself, the more the Platonic thinking keeps coming up. Now, another aspect to this is that I'm like an artist. I want to write stories. I want to create narratives. Now, I think someone might point out all humans want narratives, and there's a place for that, and we do it all the time, they would say. And yeah, maybe true. I just know I do that. And kind of separating that story from the actual facts on the ground can be a bit of a challenge. So kind of like the more I kind of push myself to try and separate, art from reality, the more I realize what religion does, what mysticism does, is it kind of lets you kind of substitute stories and narratives for what's actually true. And this is, again, why religion relies on skepticism. Because, first they need you to believe that, oh, you can't actually make sense of this chaotic world unless you have a story that was given to you, or a story that you're following.
Yeah. That's super interesting. Like, I hear this a lot, not just in like this kind of context, but I hear it a lot in sort of my work context. Because again, I work in the financial, in the investment industry. And if you think about the investment in, like, what is the investment industry and sort of this, let's just say, philosophy have in common? And I would say they're both very abstract sciences, in the sense that, what you're talking about, the concepts that you're talking about, are very far away from the concretes, right? And I think that's where this whole narrative comes in. And people use the word narrative, I think, almost pejoratively, in a sense, and almost a bit either subjective or nihilistic, where it's like, well, just come up with a good narrative and then like everyone believes it, in a sense, or just come up with a good narrative and like it becomes the truth, right? That would be sort of a little bit of the Platonic kind of subjectivism. I don't know if it's Platonic or not, but definitely a bit of like, primacy of consciousness is how I'll put it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think.
But really, when you, I'm sorry, just to finish.
Go on, yeah.
But really, when you think about what that is, I think about it even in the context of art. These narratives are it almost plays a role of art, where it almost concretizes the immense complexity of the concepts that we are literally using to live, right? Like the whole framework of like investing rests upon like, how does the world work, right? And I'm sure, like, telling a story, like, think about how Rand's novels, right? Let's take like Atlas Shrugged, right? Like, how does the world work? Like, like, you can't just, Leonard Peikoff wrote Opar, a complete masterpiece if you haven't read it. And like, even that, hundreds of pages is not like enough to really convey the entire philosophic base, but rather you can use something like a story or a narrative to really condense vast sums of information and concepts into something that you could hold in your brain. So that's my analysis of narratives, and why like they're important, and why like just like you said, like why the narratives around religions and myths, are just so powerful, because they really can take they really condense down a vast number of ideas into something that we can hold. And now you could go on and you could tell stories, right? Like, you could tell the origin story depending on your religion, and it explains so much, rather than trying to have to go through kind of the whole rigmarole. I'd love to hear what people think about that. I just it's something I think about a decent amount, but never really kind of, put out there.
Yeah, and in addition to the value of art and stories, like seeing characters in fiction or in art, any kind of art, there's also life. Like, you see people, you like what you see, you want what they have, not only in terms of their possessions or whatever, but like their character. You admire them, and so you could kind of get that from real life. And that's an important part of like finding your place in the world, I think. that maybe objectivists don't always emphasize enough, but should. Yeah. Mark Moses with $3. Thank you for that. We got a $3 super chat.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Yeah,
I think it's I remember first when I got introduced, when I first discovered Rand, and I was like, oh, like this novelist just came up with like a philosophy. I'm like, that sounds so, like, I don't know, like, what's the right word?
Scientologist,
like almost like silly, is the best way I can say it right now. But now, if you think it now, like the more I think about it, the more I understand it, and the more genius I think it actually is, and connected to the world. Like, think about Rand as a novelist thinking about philosophy versus a philosophy PhD student thinking about philosophy. Philosophy PhD student is sort of academic, thinking about philosophy, right? Rand is writing stories about people, trying to understand what makes people work, what makes people act, what are people, how should they act, how do I show what people do in things, right? And like that requires getting into like, what is a person, what is man, right? And then what is man, why does man do what he do, so I can see like it's almost like an engineering approach to philosophy as opposed to like a scientist approach to science. It's like if you had this concept of science, like Rand almost approached philosophy from an engineering perspective versus from like a scientist in a lab perspective.
Yeah, I think one of Rand's contributions to philosophy is to emphasize the role of art. And then when the question comes of like how to change the world, I think artists are going to play a big role, as artists always have, but it's not something you can induce. It's not something you could sort of make happen, I don't think. And that's and then let's dip our toe in the the political culture war topic, at least to get more people watching and participating and excited. The culture warriors, the reactionary right, the people who are going to beat the left, and they accurately, might point out, politics is downstream from culture. That's something that the late Andrew Breitbart pointed out, which he may have well gotten from Ayn Rand. Yes, politics is downstream from culture, but you think you're going to change the culture by what? Like forcing it? Now, Ben Shapiro and the Daily Wire have like their own Hollywood. They're like knockoff Kmart version of Hollywood. Like I don't think it's really going to change the world. I don't think young people completely unbiased, like just completely growing up wanting to be entertained because they want to be entertained. I don't really see them being drawn to the Gina Carano movie or whatever. It's just, there could be some good stuff in there, but that's being produced. But it's like when your purpose is to, change the culture, I think you're kind of already missing the mark. And when we look at how, the left, the new left, the postmoderns, whatever, the hippies and synths, how they changed the world, it's not like they told artists like go out and make art. They taught their philosophies in one department. The humanities sort of affirmed that perspective. You had artists writing songs and writing books and making movies, and next thing you know, you and I are growing up in a world where like every other movie is presenting subjectivism, and it's projecting some kind of postmodern theme that we don't even realize, and that's just kind of the world we grow up in because artists were following their inspiration. So it's not something you can force to happen. And yeah, that's
definitely, yeah, I agree. Like art, like what, again, one of the probably the biggest void that philosophy filled for me. It's crazy to even say, like even more so, well, no, I can't say more so than the ethical and epistemological void, which fundamentally changed my life. But I had no appreciation for art before stumbling upon, the Romantic Manifesto and understanding the role that art played in my life. And really, for the first time, I was able to enjoy it. Like I used to looking back, I now understand like the art that I was drawn to was very abstract earlier on. But now I really like art that has like people in it, like, like the art in your background, by Brian Larson. Like I really enjoy that kind of art. And in fact, I need art with people. And for me, like it's a pretty interesting shift. And again, as I've thought about it a lot, I realize that it's because it's because of the ethics, right? My ethics changed from sort of nihilistic, in a sense, to one of rational self-interest. And now like I see art as like fueling me, right? Like I need like art is there to fuel me. I love inspirational art. Like I'm so devoid of art these days. I'm starved of it. In a lot of senses. Like I don't watch a lot of TV because I start watching a show or a movie and it's like, it's just too dark for me. Like I'm trying to do too much, in my life, and like, it's too dark. But exactly to kind of your point, like the flip side of it is like, when you do find these shows that are so like heroic and they're so popular, like I find that inspirational, right? Like, because it shows to me, I think it shows that the good and the good that people still have, kind of the benevolence, how they're starved for, heroism. They're starved for inspiration, and they're just sick of the darkness, I think that permeates. So like, to your point, like, yeah, like I think, I do think art and culture, is sort of the way to change is the way to kind of change politics. I definitely don't think, changing politics matters at all.
Right. I mean, it could matter at certain times, but for long lasting results,
very, very, very short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Unless you want to live in South America and go through some of their roller coasters. Yeah.
Well, yeah.
Robert with $10 says, some folks think more in terms of narratives, the so-called narrative perspective. Others think more in terms of abstractions. The former often claim we all think in narratives, myths, stories.
Interesting.
I was talking to a friend the other day who's into objectivism, and he said the show Succession. Are you familiar with that show? Succession?
No, I have. It's been on my, someone has mentioned it. Yeah.
So you look like a cross between me and Kendall Roy. Okay. So look up Kendall Roy. So it's a show about a miserable family, a very wealthy, like the patriarch of the family is like Rupert Murdoch, he's like, or something. He like owns he owns a giant like Fox News type of business where they're just, I mean, completely off their rocker, selling trash to people. But they also, it's a conglomerate company, so they own like theme parks and resorts, and just, it's a really stupid situation. Anyway, the family is miserable. All the kids are like waiting for their father to die, and they're all like, it's like Game of Thrones, but like business version. They all want to assume the throne. But it's a wonderful show. But my friend said it's a guilty pleasure for him. And I'm like, why? I don't see why he's guilty, I guess. And he's saying, because there's no good people. There's no good guys. And I'm like, yeah, it's to me, like the value of watching a show is like, is it a good show? And what did they, some artists, some creative writers wanted to depict these characters, this family. I don't think the moral lesson should be the primary, but if there is one, it's that these people are miserable because they're not selfish enough, because they're petty and materialistic. And they're dishonest, but kind of beneath that, it's just a good show, and it's entertaining, and it's I don't know, I can't tell you exactly the value of a TV show, but that show has it. So I don't say things like guilty pleasure, and I don't really buy into that concept for myself.
Yeah, it's funny. Like I have a really hard time watching dark like shows, for example, and even like music probably less so. Music's probably my my jam, like where I like art the most, and probably followed by visual arts. But I guess what else is there's no tasting art, I guess. But I just have a hard time with it, and I think that goes to the personal nature of art, where it's what are you interested in getting out of it, right? Like for me, I don't have a lot of free time, so like when I want to use that free time to sort of rejuvenate. And like darkness doesn't rejuvenate, it just sort of reinforces all the challenges, even if it's true, right? Like it could be, what did Peikoff call it? Like true, like bad art that's true, or something like that.
The value of
Oh,
like philosophically evil art.
yeah,
Like
exactly.
that.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, like done like great art that's just evil or something like that. And it's like I don't have a that's not how I want. It's personal choice. I don't want to spend my time kind of doing that, or just looking at Robert Naser's comment there. It would turn me into a manic depression, right? Which is the Hendrix song he's referencing. Ironically, I could listen to Hendrix all day.
I'm going to ask you, I'm going to answer, and then I'll ask you if there's any aspect of objectivism you struggle with the most. And here's mine that I'm not sure I agree with either the philosophy or maybe remarks Rand has made or what, but I think Rand, like everyone, is very good at emphasizing the art that she does like. And telling you what's great about romantic realism. But sometimes her criticism of other arts, and much less, let alone objectivist since Rand, criticizing art that they don't like, I'm just not sure I agree. And the best example of that is in music. Okay, so it's very, you could hear like Leonard Peikoff in his, before retiring, saying this music these kids are listening to now, it's nihilistic, it's destructive. I mean, I think he's briefly touched upon modern music. Rand certainly hated rock and roll. And you look, an outsider looking in, someone who's not immersed in modern music could easily say, well, this is clearly destructive. But if you look at how these types of music came to be, and you can do the same with other art, movies, whatever it is, novels, whatever it is. Somebody fell in love with music at one point. Let's say a 12-year-old discovers Pink Floyd, let's say, or let's say it's classical music, whatever it is. They discover music. They are really passionate about it. They study music. They learn to play music or to compose it. They survey various types of music. They end up combining different genres of music. They end up with a product that you had to kind of be years invested into listening to this kind of music to really appreciate. It just sounds like noise to the uninitiated. So at what point was anyone being nihilistic is kind of the question. At what point was somebody assaulting reality? And, I would even go further, I think Rand really didn't like savages banging on the drums. Why not? I mean, everywhere you look, it seems to be a very basic behavior that human beings like to do. Babies reach for the spoon and hit the pot. Like, it just, wherever you go in the world, people are enjoying a beat. Like, that doesn't mean that's the only kind of music that people, it doesn't mean it's the high art that people need. So I think the objectivist view of art, I think, is very good when focused on the positive, but some of the denunciations of non-romantic realism, let's say, I really struggle with, and I don't really think I agree with, because again, somebody they consumed some art, it inspired them, it made them want to live, it made them want to create art. They studied the greats and they studied the contemporaries. They end up with something that really is impressive. And it includes a beat, and it includes distorted guitars, let's say, or a movie that's out of order. Tarantino. Nobody loves anything more than Tarantino loves his movies. That guy lives and breathes movies and his own work. I mean, I wish everyone was as passionate as Tarantino. But yeah, his movies are out of order. They're silly. They're kind of self-referential and making fun of the genre that they're in. So you can hear someone saying this is postmodern nihilism and an assault on art. You can hear them say that, but I just don't see it. So I struggle with that part of objectivism.
I think it's weird the more I know, shooting from the hip here, like, I think it's weird that objectivism or, any philosophy would have an opinion of art, right? I think what it should do, and I think it actually does do, I think, Rand does this, is you can identify what art is, identify what it does, how it works, why humans need it, and all that, but sort of the preferences of it, I don't think it necessarily should have, or needs to have an opinion of it, right? If you think about, if art is just a metaphysical recreation of the world, or selective recreation of the world, right? Like you can have, I do agree that there's sort of good art and bad art in the context of the ethics of good and bad. But you can have, like Peikoff said, like evil art that's true or something like that, right? Where like someone like the Russian writers, where like they're just telling these horrible stories, but they're doing it, but they're extremely well integrated, right? If you make bad choices, you get bad outcomes. Like that is an integrated view of the world, and you are telling them in a very skillful way, that makes sense to me, in sense like why that can be good art. But like whether or not you enjoy that or not, like it just should be like how well it concretizes what's going on in the world. So like going back to like beats and all sorts of all sorts of music, pretty interesting. I think Yaron Brook recently did a show on where he was critiquing music, and I thought it was pretty interesting in that he made this point where like popular music tends to be nostalgic. And I think that's very true. And I think that's why a lot of us I'll speak for me. I think that's why I really liked, the music that I grew up with, was because when I fell in love with music, I was, distinctly 11 years old. My favorite album was Pearl Jam 10, for example, back in 1991. And like it hit on sort of an emotion that I was going on at the time, where it was very energetic, had a lot of energy, had a lot to say. I mean, I never really listened to the lyrics, and it was just like, for whatever reason, it resonated with me. Right now, interestingly enough, like, I went to a Pearl Jam concert pretty recently here in New York, and the music, how they play the same songs now as, successful 50-year-olds is like, it just struck me how different it is than when they made the albums, as like 20-year-olds. It's a lot more benevolent now, which makes a lot of sense because they've had a lot of success now, and they've lived like pretty good lives, and portraying that through their art. If you're playing it, if you're producing art that is integrated with your views, like it's going to, especially in music, you're going to see, it's a window into that person's kind of soul, for lack of a better word. So I thought that was like super interesting. And again, like art was not something I was able to understand or appreciate really until again, kind of coming down philosophy and objectivism. And like going to like some of this other art, like artistic preference, like I think it's just where you are in life, right? Like if you are like, people at different stages of their lives have different contexts, people in different, obviously contexts of different contexts, right? Where you grew up. So like the question is what speaks to you, what sort of portrays the world that you think exists around you, I think is really, it's sort of, I'm not going to say subjective, but it is sort of contextual, right? It's going to depend upon the context of the consumer of the art.
Mm-hmm. Roland with 11.99 euros says, I have my doubts about objectivist aesthetics too, although from the opposite perspective, I'm not sure about the value of great depictions of evil ideas. Interesting.
Yeah, that's interesting. I sort of agree. I don't agree, I guess. I'm with you, Roland, and like, I don't like evil art in a sense, or depicting evil in art. However, imagine we lived in a society that was, the capitalist utopian society, where there wasn't a lot of evil around. I think the value of evil art would go up in a sense, because, I feel like there's enough evil in the world now, where I don't need to be reminded of it. Like it's just turn on Twitter and go down any political feed. Like there's a lot of evil out there. And that's why maybe I like heroic art, because I feel like maybe I'm not filling my cup of heroism. And maybe, the opposite would hold true if we lived in really heroic and benevolent societies. Maybe the value of evil art would increase, because you wouldn't see it that much, right? So you would there would be value in being reminded of the destruction of bad ideas. Just totally going off the cuff here.
And What I don't like is cruelty for the sake of depicting cruelty. You know, like some of the horror movies. Saw. I never saw Saw, but I heard it was just about a guy who just traps people and just puts them in situations where they need to make like Sophie's Choice, or it's like Gail Wynand with a chainsaw or something. And you know, cruelty, movies about cruel teenagers, I guess has more value because it kind of shows you kind of what goes on, and maybe that sort of it's like holding up a mirror to the youth or something. I guess I could see the value of that, but just general cruelty and torture, I've never wanted to watch. Apollo with 2 pounds says, art as catharsis versus romantic realism. He's asking, do you know what that first one is? Art as catharsis? I don't really know what catharsis is.
Yeah, I don't know. Maybe you want to explain yourself. Like, you mean just as like being like cathartic in a sense?
I don't know what that means. What does cathartic mean?
Yeah, like you know, like just being like comforting, maybe. You know, assuming that's what you mean, like art as a comforter versus inspirational. Maybe that's what you mean. Apologies if you could just chime in. Oh, letting out. So he says letting out negative emotions. Yeah, like I could totally see that as like a pressure valve, right? You know, is a way to, you know, almost like therapy, right? You just got to put out to the world and explain it, and it could be very effective, right? And you know, that would be value. You know, that would be value to like the artist, or maybe even value. You know, maybe it could be value as the appreciator of art, where like you just need someone to sympathize with you. I could totally see that.
I mean, in food, you know, there's a time for like a ramen cup, and there's a time for, you know, a Michelin star meal. Like, you wouldn't want to constantly wake up and just eat like a feast or whatever.
Yeah,
maybe some people would. Yeah, but it's interesting the way that capitalism and you know the industry has brought about the sort of the marriage of art with kind of a business model where, you know, we got sitcoms and all types of very cheap art that to one person, like that's his, you know, that's his Reardon medal in a certain way. Like the creator of Full House, you know, that guy, he's got something to really be proud of. But at the same time, it's like you could hear somebody rolling their eyes and saying, oh, this is trash. You're selling people, you know, it's like you just gotta kind of keep in mind there's a time and place for these different things. You know, there's relaxing at the end of the day, and then there's watching an amazing movie, you know, and on when it comes out. So
yeah, and again, if you live in a capitalist society, I mean, you have a marketplace of competing art. I mean, you could see what people need and what people want at different times. Like, I don't think you need to, like, going back to like your initial point, like I don't think we need to judge art. You know, it's just like, hey, it's, you know, I think it's a matter of personal taste at, you know, at a specific time. You know, I mean, you're consuming it like you're consuming food, right? Like, you know, do I want ramen today, or do I want the 5-star Michelin chef?
Tom, the member, says Rand made some cogent comments on humor and art as rebellious that are a result of unhealthy psychology. So the few comments Rand has made about humor, I definitely did not agree with. One of them that I remember was I don't know if she ever committed to paper a perspective on humor, but I know someone asked her about like, what's the importance of humor? And she got like angry at the question, as she sometimes did. She says, you know, ask your professor to show me someone who humor is important to, or is a big deal. It was but then she started thinking out loud, and she said, well, I guess humor could sort of knock down something. Like, we see a woman walking down the street dressed up and she slips on a banana peel. Like, it's funny because she's pretentious, but then like she's falling. And I don't think many people, I mean, I don't think Ayn Rand would find that a woman slipping on a banana peel funny. I don't particularly find that funny. I think so, you know, she's kind of coming up with these ideas in real time, and it becomes like the official objectivist view on humor, according to some, but it's not. I think you have to really care about something to form a great perspective on it. So like I said, Rand's strength was talking about art that she did like. And clearly humor was not something that mattered much to her, in my understanding.
I will say, technically, anything Rand does say about objectivism is officially objectivism, because it is her.
No, it's not. No, not if she.
But
not
what
if
I mean,
if she say it, well, let's clarify, because not everyone like might know. It's like what she committed to paper and published. That's part of her philosophy. But in a Q&A, she's talking to a hippie audience, and she says homosexuality is disgusting. That is not an official objectivist perspective on
100%.
homosexuality.
100%. 100%. Yeah.
Now, so I talked about my struggle with objectivism is that the aesthetics in particular, or some of the kind of the critiques of non-romantic realism, let's say. Do you have an aspect of objectivism that you struggle with, that you're not sure you agree with, or
I think it would be some of the applications of it. I don't really have a beef with any of the the development of the framework and the science. Again, I'm not a philosopher. I've read Opar and listened to her books on tape several times. I've read kind of all of Rand's stuff. But I'm not a, I'm a user of a philosopher. I'm not a scholar of her philosophy. But I think so I don't really have to me, it makes sense. It's all pretty logical and integrated. But I think the applications, for example, homosexuality, her comments on that, I think are just wrong. But I also think sort of outside the scope of philosophy, it would kind of be a misapplication of it. If I'm assuming, let's just take that for an example. She said, well, if human life is good, then homosexuality is bad because you can't reproduce. Well, that to me, if that is her view, I don't know if that is her view.
I don't think she said anything close to that.
No, but I'm trying to think about why her view of it was bad.
I think at the time she lived, psychologists considered, deviance to be a psychological, a mental problem, a mental health issue. And there was that. And most of the public figures, or most of the people in public advertising their sexual proclivities, were parading down the street in assless chaps. And, and she had an audience booing her at her own Ford Forum lectures, and maybe she said something that it's been reported that later that week she said she thought about it and said I don't agree with that statement that I made. So
but something like that would be that I don't necessarily agree with. Again, kind of the music thing too, I think is just, I don't know, I kind of disagree with, but again, I kind of view these as applications of the philosophy, as opposed to, it's basically a misapplication. In terms of the philosophy itself, I think the concept, existence exists, right? Pretty hard to argue with that if you are, if you believe existence exists. If you are metaphysically into the, if you metaphysically doubt that, if you doubt that metaphysical axiom, which, religion, for example, would do, then that's something else. But I don't really take too many issues with the written scholarly work of objectivism as a framework for living.
Wyatt asks, how do we separate what she was coming up off the cuff and what part of the live discussions are part of objectivism? Maybe bring that up to Dr. Binswanger or something. I know a big part of the epistemology book is discussions they were having. So what if she slipped and said something there that's not consistent, and how do you include that but not something she said at a Q&A?
Or maybe think about it, right? This is not religion. This is not said it, it's true, right?
But you do want to know. I think it does benefit us to know what's part of objectivism and what's sort of elective or not necessarily. Okay. Well, good talk. Let's plug some stuff. We got at 7 p.m. UK time, Finance Friday with Jim Brown on Uncle Sam's unpayable debt. Then tomorrow on Saturday at 6 p.m. UK time, it's Week in Short, a compilation of clips from this week. Let's hope we made it. Then on Sunday at 3:30 p.m. UK time, the Objective Communication Study Group with James Valiant. I'm guessing I think that's for members only, though it doesn't specify. So go ahead, become a member either way. Yeah. All right.
I'm sure he has a lot to say about the metaphysics of, of religion and of other philosophies and of objectivism for sure.
I'm sure. All right. Good talk. I think we touched upon a lot. There's a lot more we could say, but we might as well call it a wrap there. Now Wyatt is taunting you, I think. He says 2 minutes ago, it was every word she said, happy face. Well, that's why we clarified. And I made sure It was clear not every word Rand uttered in her life is part of her philosophy. It's what she committed to paper, I think. It's what she published and said, I've thought about this, I've revised it, I've tested it, so to speak. And anyway.
And there is also every word Rand speaks was not a development of her philosophy, right? Like everything she said is not objective, like it is like spoken word. Like, think about this: everything Jesus said isn't in the Bible, right? As it pertains to the, everything that Rand said about objectivism qua philosophy is objectivism because it is hers. Everything she said as an application of objectivism is not objectivism; it is an application of objectivism.
Yeah, she could be misreading the culture at times. I've been told she's made mistakes about Immanuel Kant.
She may have made a mistake or two in her life.
Well, yeah, but like, given what she knew about Kant, she misrepresented some of the things he said, but not purposely. But it was not anything fundamental about Kant. It was just a particular point here and there, just because scholarly understanding of Kant develops in 50 years.
She's human. She has a context. There is no form of truth that exists in the world. Truth is out there to be discovered with context.
And Wyatt says that wasn't a slam earlier. He was teasing. I don't know about this destructive, nihilistic humor that you're bringing onto our show here. Okay, Christopher, hold on. I know we're supposed to wrap it. Christopher says, I'm of the opinion she nailed Kant. Okay, well, how about we bring Jason Rines on the show, Christopher, and you can explain the philosophy of Kant to him. Now I'm the one teasing. All right. Thank you all. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. I mean, she nailed Kant essentially, but along the way, she might have said something about his ethics. Like, I think the thing is, she said, according to Kant, you may not even be happy with your own moral stature. Like, even that's too selfish. But actually, scholars since, I think, have found that, no, actually Kant, with a better translation, you see that Kant was saying you may enjoy your moral status. It's just that your moral purpose is not to be anything selfish. Anyway, thank you for joining us today. Leave a like, leave a super thanks, and see you next week for the Daily Objective. Catch you later, Seth.
Catch you later, and everyone enjoy their weekend, man.
That's right, and goodbye.